Hi everyone, welcome back to Noteworthy World. Hope you had a great week. Today I'm going to take you through some of my favourite book recommendations for school. For today's video, I'm going to go through 15 different books that I recommend everyone to read, their title and author, the first section of the book, and then a short summary of the novel. The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. In my younger and more vulnerable years, my father gave me some advice that I've been turning over in my head ever since. Whenever you feel like criticizing anyone, he told me, just remember that all people in this world haven't had the advantages that you've had. The Great Gatsby is a novel set in 20th century America and explores American opportunity and discusses the lack of such. The main character, Jay Gatsby, is introduced to us for having an extraordinary gift for hope, and we come to know the character as one obsessed with the idea of the American dream. The Secret History by Donna Trapp. The snow in the mountains was melting, and Bunny had been dead for several weeks before we came to understand the gravity of our situation. The Secret History is a thriller that starts off by talking about the murder of the narrator's best friend, and progresses to talk about how he had a hand in the situation and how he ended up there. The novel progresses further as the main character transfers to Hampton College, and the pressures to act in a certain way has been bestowed upon him. The book then focuses on the consequences of these actions and the situations that Richard Papin must navigate. A Separate Piece by John Knowles. I went back to Devon School not long ago. I found it looking oddly newer than when I was a student there 15 years before. A Separate Piece by John Knowles is a coming-of-age story that focuses on the friendship between two young boys. This book is absolutely amazing as it focuses on the deeper emotions that manifest within the characters and the way that the situations around them affect their interaction with each other. Withering Heights by Emily Bronte. I have just returned from a visit to my landlord, the solitary neighbour that I shall be troubled with. Withering Heights, set in the winter of 1801, centres around two manor houses and its inhabitants, one sharing the name and title of the book and the other named Thrushcross Grange. The novel takes place both in storytelling flashback and the present events, and focuses largely on the progression and deterioration of the characters. Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. My father's family name being Pirrip, and my Christian name Philip, my infant tongue can make of both names nothing longer or more explicit than Pip. Great Expectations is a novel centered around a young protagonist named Pip, who lives with his older sister and her husband after the death of his parents. Pip soon falls into acquaintance with the young Estella and her adoptive mother, Miss Havisham. The story builds further as an anonymous person offers to pay for his training in becoming a gentleman. A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief. It was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light. It was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope. It was the winter of despair. We had everything before us. We had nothing before us. We were all going direct to heaven. We were all going direct the other way. In short, the period was so far like the present period that some of its noisiest authorities insisted on its being received, for good or for evil, in the superlative degree of comparison only. A Tale of Two Cities novel setting is in both Paris and London in the late 18th century. The book begins in 1775 London, where Jarvis Lorry meets with a girl called Lucy Manette, where her carriage is stopped by a messenger, and she later finds out that the death of her father was false and that he is in actuality being released from prison. There is much progression through this novel, with events taking place in both London and Paris. Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. Last night I dreamt I went to Manderley again. It seemed to me I stood by the iron gate to the drive, and for a while I could not enter, for the way was barred to me. Rebecca is a flashback novel about a heroine in Europe who remains nameless throughout the book. She recalls how she met her husband and the events that followed. The biggest plague over the heroine is her husband's previous wife, who drowned in a cove by the newlyweds' house, and whose spirit haunts their home. The heroine continues to doubt her husband's love for her more and more as the book progresses. Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. There was no possibility of taking a walk that day. We had been wandering indeed in the leafless shrubbery and hour in the morning, but since dinner, Mrs. Reed, when there was no company, dined early. The cold winter wind had brought with it clouds so sombre and a rain so penetrating that further outdoor exercise was now out of the question. Jane Eyre is a book that doesn't necessarily fall into one specific genre. It is labelled as both an autobiography, although not written by an author named Jane Eyre, and a classic, among other things. But the novel centres around one girl's life that parallels to the author's, and so in this way is an autobiography in an abstract sense. Emma by Jane Austen. Emma Woodhouse, handsome, clever and rich, with a comfortable home and happy disposition, seemed to unite some of the best blessings of existence, and had lived nearly 21 years in the world with very little to distress or vex her. Emma is a romantic comedy about a rich girl in England who is raised by both her father and a lady named Miss Taylor, as her mother passed away when she was 5. The story illustrates the relationships between the characters and how they, especially Emma, navigate them. The Light Between Worlds by Laura E. Weymouth. This is how an air raid begins. In the dead of night, with silence and normality shattered by the banshee wail of a siren. The Light Between Worlds is set in 1944 and tells the story of young Evelyn, her sister and her brother. As bombs are showering down her home of London, Evelyn and her family are in hiding in their backyard shelter, until suddenly they are transported to a whole new world, where there is no war and the woods make her feel home at last. After 6 years, the story takes a surprising turn. The Colour Purple by Alice Walker. You better not tell nobody but God. It'll kill your mummy. The Colour Purple is an epistolary novel set in the 1900s that follows the main protagonist Celie, an African-American girl from the age of 14 years old. The book is written as Celie's letters to God that recount the many traumatic experiences of her life through much of the novel, then shifts to her writing to her younger sister Nettie, who she thought was dead. It is a book that contains many sensitive scenes but is extremely well written. Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. Pride and Prejudice, although written 200 years ago, has become a timeless novel, as the relevance in this book parallels to the world we are currently living in. The social construct of class and larger reputation throughout this book bridges the gap between the time period in which it was written and now. 1984 by George Orwell. It was a bright cold day in April and the clocks were striking 13. Winston Smith, his chin nuzzled into his breast in an effort to escape the vile wind, slipped quickly through the glass doors of Victory Mansions, though not quickly enough to prevent a swirl of gritty dust from entering along with him. 1984 is a brilliant but haunting dystopian novel published in 1949. This book is of Orwell's predictions of life 35 years following to the publication, in which people under constant surveillance regularly disappear and records of their existence are wiped entirely by a corrupt government. The piece centers around the necessity for freedom of speech and thought and challenges how much of it is given. It was this novel that came to produce the well-known TV show known as Big Brother, taken from the famous phrase, "Big Brother is watching you." The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. When Mr. Bilbo Baggins of Bag End announced that he would shortly be celebrating his 11th birthday with a party of great magnificence, there was much talk and excitement in Hobbiton. The Lord of the Rings is an excellent fantasy story that tells the journey of young Bilbo Baggins on his quest to destroy an extremely powerful ring. He is accompanied by Gandalf and the Hobbits on their mission to stop the Dark Lord. Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. It was a pleasure to burn. It was a special pleasure to see things eaten, to see things blackened and changed. Fahrenheit 451 is a book where most is both dead and alive simultaneously. This is shown by the mechanized dog, illustrated by the description of the main character's wife, Mildred, as she seems to inhabit no state fully, as well as the mechanized snake that saves her, again described as congruently dead and alive, among many other characters throughout the book. However, the book resides not on this, but on the simple pleasure of watching things burn.